Welcome to Selling in the Age of AI.
Yeah, this is good stuff. So,
Must-listen podcast for sales professionals who lean into technology without leaning on it. Dive into the future of sales with your hosts, the dynamic and inspiring Frank Somma, renowned keynote speaker, best-selling author, seminar leader, and business coach. Get ready for game-changing insights and strategies that value technology but place humanity at the top of the sales pyramid.
So welcome, Chris Cline. I am thrilled to have as my guest. And again, this is only podcast number 2, so this is a brave guy for waiting in this early. But Chris Cline, through Chris's 25 years of experience in the insurance agency, he has established himself as an industry resource for topics such as perpetuation, M&A, culture, agency operations, marketing and sales, data and analytics, DE&I, and technology, and is constantly asked to speak or write about these topics at industry events around the country. In the spring of 2022, Chris assumed leadership of Agents Council for Technology and as ACT's executive director. In his prior career roles, Chris led teams focused on the entire agency carrier life cycle with focus on appointments, M&A, emerging models, producer agreements, contractual complexities, and licensing. He has additional experience across diverse disciplines, ranging from raging?
Sometimes raging, yes.
Sometimes he's raging, but these are ranging from graphic design to marketing, sales, employee training, compliance, and personal lines underwriting. He was also the host of the award-winning podcast, Closing the Gap, the 2021 recipient of the Independence Bell Award, presented by the Ohio Insurance Agents for contribution to the industry, is a former board member of Insure Equality, currently a board member at Knox Licking Ohio Goodwill, and published his first book, Inertia of Legacy, in October of 23. Chris earned his degree in graphic design from the University of Akron. Away from work, Chris and his family spend as much time as possible camping, playing guitar, and cruising the family hot rod, racing BMX, and beginning work on his second book. So welcome, Chris. I'm so glad that you took a gamble and jumped on this early version of our podcast, Selling in the Age of AI.
I appreciate it immensely and just excited to chat today. I've enjoyed getting to know you, Frank, as we've just kind of started to kind of explore this topic today and set the stage. But also want to thank you for reminding me I need to get the editor's pencil out on that bio. It's just crazy, right? Every time I hear that read, I toggle between who the heck is that guy and an immense amount of gratitude for the opportunities that I've been presented in this industry. And so just a great testimony to how many different lanes that people can choose and the different disciplines that exist in our industry where you can grow and explore and learn if you're interested.
You know, I love you have such a varied background and so much experience in so many areas of the business. You know, our podcast is about selling in the age of AI, and it's not specific to insurance. However, I love insurance. I've never sold insurance. I swear to God, if I came back as a little baby sales guy again, 22 years old, I would absolutely be knocking on somebody's door to sell insurance product because it just fits so beautifully with my go-to-market, which has always been about taking responsibility for the client and being there to help. So today, with all the tech that's available and all the commercials I see about point and click and save myself money on insurance, where is the insurance producer, the insurance salesperson, where are they necessary?
Well, that's a great question. I mean, with the whole concept of selling in the age of AI, and even just going back 20 plus years to the really the advent and the total socialization of the internet, there have been conversations around, what do we need insurance agents for? Do you ultimately, what's the role of the traditional carrier? And it's been really fascinating as I've been in these roles and been an advocate for the understanding of and utilization of technology to create operational efficiency and enhance scale, whether that's top of the funnel activities to sort of deepen the core of an organization, just to be the best company possible. That somewhere along the way, there's always these conversation around, when does the customer just not need a human being involved, right? Pricing, sophistication, sales processes, whole 9 yards. One of the things that fascinates me, and we can spend some time on this if you'd like, but the Big I, where I'm that organizes this Agents Council for Technology, publishes three highly coveted and respected studies every other year
Okay.
around market share data, the overall universe. It's called the Agents Universe Study, and then a best practices document. And last cycle on those was 2024. And a couple of statistics that have stood out to me in this role, and even as I consume that data in my prior role, is market share for the independent agency and the overall financial health of the independent agency. So you can start to think about market share, personal and commercial lines insurance. It's much, much higher in commercial lines in the 80s and upper 30s. Awesome. Get the dog in the room.
Yes.
No issues. That's fun, phenomenal. But the fascinating part of that, Frank, is that, and why I mentioned this setup is we rewind the clock. There have been some studies that talk about the death of the independent agency and that there's going to be a significant contraction of the independent agency. And that did start to take a tick down, but it's actually starting to climb back again. And when I think about what's happened over the last really 5 to 10 years, several very material things have happened, right? We had the introduction of this concept of insurtech, where untold billions of dollars of external capital entered this industry. Early on, a lot of that capital was attached to this notion that we were going to disrupt the industry, that the traditional agent and the traditional carrier were dying on the vine and no longer needed, and today's consumer just needed 24/7 real time. That has subsided to thinking more about an enabling concept. But we have all this capital that was going to displace traditional insurance.
Right.
And we had a global pandemic, which created an environment where by default, we had to figure out ways to do business not face to face.
Right.
And each of those things could have, and some argue should have, contributed to the reduction in market share of a traditional independent agency.
you would
What's
think.
actually happened is market share went up.
Really?
So I talk about this as a long setup because it's helpful, I think, to dispel all of the noise out there and then to view that as a position of strength. And so when things got the most complex, despite all the tools and resources that were out there that could have displaced or drawn more consumers away from a traditional independent agency model, more customers chose an independent agent over the last several cycles of this study than before. So, we could all talk about the why in that regard, but I once had a mentor who talked about this concept of a flight to quality. And when things get confusing, things get complex, you enter new phases of your life where you don't really understand. We kind of want somebody to help us understand these things. And so it's a good place to start, I think, to understand that despite all of that, the role of a traditional insurance producer, I think, is still highly valued because people are still looking to make sure that their most significant financial investments and the things that are most important to them in their lives are adequately covered in the event that something catastrophic happens to them. And the news is full of very, very horrific
Sure.
things happening around our country. Many of those people, I think, are trying to find value from their independent agent.
It's interesting because, there's a lot to unpack in what you just
Yeah,
said.
there really is. I apologize for rambling, everybody.
No, it's wonderful. There's a lot to unpack there because, the assumption is that we're in an Amazonian world, right? I don't need to run over to the local store to buy, a pair of shoes. I can point and click, and if I don't like them, send them back. And I think that's true, and I believe that's why Amazon is fine. I believe last earnings report, Amazon may have outdone Walmart for the first time in history. So I think that that applies in those kinds of consumer products. I think in other products, no matter what, I coach people in pharmaceutical sales, I coach people in software sales, I coach people in office automation, copiers, printers, VoIP systems, insurance sales, financial salespeople. I think in all of those areas, the reason it hasn't gone to an Amazon point and click situation, and like you said, the independent agents grew, which is surprising, is because they're nuanced. And I think that you can give me a drop down menu, right? If I'm insuring my place or even my finances, there are people who have, a sophisticated portfolio with somebody who's taking care of it. I know a super successful person who I interviewed for my book that has over $2 billion under management in his group. Why are people paying him? Whatever these guys charge, a point and a half of your total wealth for someone to manage your portfolio. Just get an S&P fund from, one of these free deals, Vanguard or something, and you're off and running. Because it's nuanced, because it isn't quite as easy as a drop-down menu and click. And I think that's when you're talking about independent insurance agents, I think that's what those salespeople are bringing to the table is the nuance.
Yeah, that's really well thought out, Frank. I completely agree, right? And this Amazonian experience concept is something that we have a conversation we have very frequently in our world.
Sure.
And one of the sort of like hyperbolic things I like to do is say, well, how many people in the room have a doctor? How many people have an accountant? How many people have an attorney? And by then, nearly everybody has, I mean, literally raised their hand.
Mm.
And my question is, well, how many of you have bought or purchased any of those services on Amazon or online? And maybe somebody's used LegalZoom or something along like
Yeah.
that for something basic. But by and large, if you're a business owner or somebody, sort of any sort of wealth accumulation, you haven't. And so in our industry, we talk about where we try to understand risk and create customized risk management packages for our consumers
Right.
and try to make sure they're custom tailored to your specific needs. That's very much like a professional service. So going so far then, so then why do we feel like we need to compete completely with the Amazonian experience where it's like buying a blender or something
Right.
that's
Right.
more of a widget oriented thing. So, and it's not that binary, right? Because everything's got some sort of continuum. And so now I start to think about it as now what can we learn from the Amazonian, the Amazonian experience? First of all, education, there's feedback mechanism, you can manage reviews, you can kind of do it any time of day that you want. There's recommended products and services that are
Right.
similar or people like you. I think there's some things that our industry can and is learning from along the way. But you're right. I mean, just to kind of go through and just think about a basic personal lines policy. What's your deductible? What's your med pay? How much is your home worth? Do you have other structures? Do you need an umbrella? How much liability do you have? I mean, and reading it off of your current deck page is an interesting thing, right? I mean, who knows if that's really what you need, if there's been changes in your life. So having ways to work through that. And that's where I think, this whole conversation around what artificial intelligence can do, how do we start to create an environment where maybe we can create more of an educational dynamic or a set of tools there,
Right.
uh, or on the other end, leveraging the technology to take operational inefficiency, duplication of data entry in general, and
Mm.
remove those things from the plate of the people that are here to help understand our risk and protect us so that they can have those conversations. And those are simple things to say. I think they're really hard to realize, but creating an environment where a human can add value, which is you and me talking through what you need. I can sense, are you anxious or upset or overly concerned about something else over the other? I mean, those kind of things are really hard to do in a
Mm.
drop down click here buy now scenario.
So, Chris, what do you say then to salespeople that are trying to make their living as professional salespeople? I mean, we can focus on insurance, that's your industry, but I think, you've got a broad enough view to say there are similarities in other businesses that aren't so cut and dried in the point and click world. What do you say to those folks? How do they separate themselves? What can they do today to combat against somebody, you know, going online and purchasing their product and or seeing something similar and assuming it's the same?
I think there's a lot of things in that. I think first of all, for somebody who's selling a product of any kind, but particularly in our industry, I think it's really understanding what your target customer actually looks like and acknowledging at some level there are people that buy their insurance online and that buy shoes
Hmm.
online and buy their clothes online. That's great, right? And there will forever be a segment of insurance buyers who are just fine buying their personal auto or even their small business policy at 11 o'clock on a Saturday night, and never talking to a human being. Wrapping your head around that probably isn't your target customer in the first place. There's a way to go combat that, but really understanding what you want to get good at, what segment of the population, whether personal or businesses that you want to serve, I think is critical because you can't possibly be everything to everybody. And our industry has, the whole niches to riches concept comes up, right? And there's conversations in insurance all the time around whether being a generalist or being a specialist is the way to go. That's a strategic decision that each person can make. But
Hmm.
understand competing as a generalist makes it very hard to be everything to everybody. And to really be able to strategically focus on what tools you invest in to create operational efficiency or even capability as a customer experience, how to invest in talent, how to
Right,
invest in marketing tools, and those kind of things. So it's starting off with just really knowing what it is you're trying to accomplish, what your mix of business looks like, and what your target clientele, and that can be plural, looks like. I think is a great place to start.
I think that that's a great point, and it brings me to an interview I did with a guy named Larry Weiss, who's a wildly successful entrepreneur in his company's called Atlantic Tomorrow's Office, and they're like, I don't know, $200 million a year in office automation sales, 400 employees, whatever. And Larry said to me, if you're really great salesperson, you're able to say, this is not my customer. You have to be able to know when it's not a fit and have the confidence to walk away. And there was so much in that. We talked further, but there's so much in that concept. Like you were just saying, is that who you want to go after? Create your niche and see who your clientele, plural, should be. Because what goes into that for me is, as a professional salesperson, I've got to have a prospect list that is robust enough to allow me to walk away from something that isn't a fit. When I have a prospect list that's too lean, I'm going to try to put that square peg in a round hole because I need every bit of business I can find. So I think that's primary to what we're talking about is you got to do the work. You have to have a big enough prospect list so that you can make choices when it comes down to it. And I think what's super interesting and what Larry said also is when you tell somebody, I think where you are is good, or I'm not sure that this is a great fit, that person will probably tell that story to many other people because you'll be one of the few salespeople that ever walked away from a sale willingly. And won't that do a lot in your referral end of business?
Well, certainly it'll help your staff and your team even really know what they're focused on. But
Hmm.
you talk about like there's these competing concepts at times where it's hard to walk away from a dollar a commission or a dollar a revenue. And in some of the work I've done over the years, it's been sort of inside arm's length from the overall valuation of an independent, agency. And early on, for years, it was always the value of an independent agency, whether it was internally or externally sold, was largely driven by some sort of multiple of revenue.
Okay.
And then as data became more and more accessible and external cap in the M&A space and the independent insurance channel really took off like gangbusters in the early 2010s, um, and has been going really strong ever since. But now that's really gotten to the point where now there's this expression that not all dollars of commission are created equally. And
Okay.
so if it depends on the amount of expense that goes into driving that commission. And so this is where specialization and really having a focus and being able to build out your value prop and kind of did the point that you were mentioning that
Mm,
Mr. Weiss talked about is being able to say no. Part of that is I could write you and I could collect X amount of commission revenue from that.
right.
But what if that's not a profitable dollar of commission?
Right.
And from an operational perspective. So having that kind of clarity of understanding what the profit margin is on
Mhm.
doing something will allow you. So, I mean, there's people that love to write vineyards and wineries and microbreweries, right? Because it's
Mhm.
cool. And maybe they get really, really good at it, become an expert and can scale that. But can you do that profitably? There's insurance agencies that write non-standard personal auto, which some people wouldn't touch with a 10-foot pole,
Right.
but they have figured out processes and say, this is what we're going to do. We're going to serve this segment of the market, and we're going to build capabilities, hire staff, and focus on being able to do that in a way that allows us to make money because on all ends of the spectrum are customers who still need insurance. I mean, that's one of the interesting things about insurance is that by and large it's required by law
Yeah.
and or being it's required to get a loan. So everybody needs it. So figure out where you want to play. And that's the thing where you're writing non-standard auto and multi-million dollar homes. It's really hard to get really good at either. And there are a lot of agencies that have figured out how to do it. But we could
Oh, yeah. You know, what's interesting is there's two halves to that profitable commission, right? There is what is the cost to service that account, and that's data you're looking at, right? Your overhead
yeah.
in office space, personnel, computers, technology, blah 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 blah, and then there's the acquisition cost. You know, what are you spending to bring that client in? As a
Right.
professional salesperson, I think the acquisition cost may not be across industries. It may not be something that you look at like a business owner, right? So I'm not saying, it costs me $10 per lead or $22 per lead, or I use Zoom Info or I use this other thing. Whatever it is, I'm using the technology. I think where AI comes in now for us, especially, is being able to whittle down that acquisition cost and be able to target more thoroughly the types of people that we want to go after. But as a professional salesperson versus a business owner, maybe I'm not looking at the cost per lead, right? Because I'm not necessarily spending. I'm Googling, I have the free version of ChatGPT, I have a CRM provided by my company, whatever it is. So it may not be dollars in cost, but what is it costing you in time? What does it cost you
Time.
to acquire a company as a prospect? So, you know, back in the days when folks answered the phone, you could argue and you could walk around freely. You could argue that if you were selling office furniture, you could only knock on 50 doors in an afternoon, but you could phone call 100 people. So isn't your time better spent here than there? And what it came out to in the end, I think in all businesses, what that there was a mix of ways to go after business. So I think as a professional salesperson, Chris, and in the tech like you do, what can salespeople do to streamline and be able to cut their cost, which is personal time. That's all you have is you, right? So how do they use the tech to streamline their process to find the right people and be helpful to those folks and make commission dollars?
Yeah, it's an interesting question too. Is it's thinking about the component parts of the process and almost mapping how much time is spent on those and whether or not you're adding value as the human being in that, or if there are tools and resources that can get it off of your plate. Maybe it's less necessary, or are ways to do things more efficiently and more cheaply. And
Huge. Drill down into that a little bit. So mapping out the components and then seeing what of that you could replace your human talk about that. That's super interesting to me. Can you get drill down on that a little bit?
Well, I get, in the insurance space, I remember this, and I don't take credit for this, but I was at an industry event and they were kind of talking about like typical agencies when they want to grow. It was, well, we need more producers, which
Right.
are, the salespeople. And the person that was running this event started, well, maybe you do need more salespeople, but what are your salespeople doing every day? Are
Right.
they doing things that drive sales? Are they doing customer servicing? Are they doing data entry? And then when you start to think about in many agencies, a successful producer is likely one of the highest compensated people. So are you getting the most out of that compensation? And so I was thinking about an example a number of years ago where I was sitting with an agency owner who was asking questions about the rating platform that the carrier I worked for offered.
Right.
And I was doing the training thing, and here's how you do it and all that. And then it kind of hit me, well, why are you quoting policies?
Right.
And isn't your time more at the cost per minute or hour of you? Couldn't you hire somebody to significantly reduce cost to
Hmm.
take the data you got from your interaction with the client to do the data entry and then give you the quotes or the options or the
Yeah.
proposals? So you start to think about the component part of all the way at the top, like finding a prospect to call, calling them, and calling them as in air quotes, however you interact with them to get
I
the
understand.
opportunity to interact with them. And then it's gathering the data, getting the data entered. I mean, there's all these steps that go into the
Sure.
entire sales process. And particularly in smaller insurance agencies and maybe in smaller businesses to begin with, oftentimes the owner or the principal runs a lot of those processes, or producers come from a role where they're used to holding on to all of the things for
Yeah.
some sort of, I think, inaccurate perception that that's where all the value comes from.
Right.
And so some of the most successful insurance agencies are those who have invested in a support mechanism, either technology or even a lesser paid staff member to handle some of those
Sure.
clerical and administrative tasks so that a salesperson could go do sales things and
Yeah.
not type addresses all day long. Because when you're doing that, you're not selling.
No, Chris, I mean, this goes back to the basic components of leadership, right? You've got to be able to give out tasks, understand, and if you are the entrepreneur that started the business, you are the big producer, whatever.
Right.
When you give something to somebody, they're not going to do it as well or as fast in your mind, right? You've got to be willing to understand that they may not do it as well, as fast, or exactly the same as you would do it, and that's okay
So,
because
right.
the time that you're saving allows you to do the things that you're great at. And I wrote a blog about this a few weeks ago about, doubling down on the things that you're great at and finding other people to do the things that you're not so great at. But what you're talking about is super interesting in that how much time do we waste on non-selling activities? And, I coach a lot of salespeople, and sometimes I'll say to them, remember this. I want you to be a team player. I want you to participate in what your company wants and your team wants, and I want you to be cooperative. And at the end of the year, if you're the number one most cooperative, sweetest, loveliest, everybody loves you, and you're 30% of goal, you're fired.
Yeah. What's
But
it,
at
right?
the end of the year, if you're not so nice and you're a little bit, lack cooperation perhaps, and you're 300% of gold, they're going to want to clone you. So remember, you get paid to sell. Remember, you get paid to sell. It doesn't mean not to be cooperative. It means what Chris said. Focus on the components that require you specifically. I think that's a huge point, Chris.
Well, there's a couple things in that. Being cooperative kind of goes both way, or being a good team player. And so if you are in an organization that is invested in a support team or support mechanism, so there's a role that's there to
Right.
do the data entry, collect all the, and you are not transferring part of the process to people who are there, that becomes problematic too, because now it's created a mess in the process, inconsistency in how work gets done. And so you might think as a salesperson that you do that better or in a more timely fashion than
Sure.
anybody else could. There's also a chance that that somebody else could do it better than you. And if you're really geared to going out and driving top of the funnel sales activities,
Right.
broad brush statement, odds are you're not in love with and probably not the best at doing a lot of the clerical data entry administrative functions. There are people that excel at that and love to do it and thrive at it that would be miserable if they had to make outbound calls all day long. And so understanding that delineation of task and function, requisite skill set, and appropriate compensation for each of those things is effective leadership and management.
Huge.
It doesn't mean those people are any less valuable. Well, they are in terms of compensation, but they're
That's
all critical steps, right? And
absolutely.
by not using those, you could actually be you could be viewed as not being a team player because you're perceived as not trusting your team,
Yes.
not following the
Yes.
compliance steps and processes.
Yeah.
And yeah, and you're probably not hitting your goal because you're doing a whole bunch of stuff that doesn't really, sort of align with what the role is.
And what you said before, I know you said broad stroke. If you're great at top of the funnel stuff, you're probably not, broad stroke, but I'm going to say 95% of the time that's spot on. I look at, like, I have a person that does, when I go out to do a keynote at a convention or whatever, I have some slides. I went over the slides with my person that does them, and when she transferred them from her Mac and she sent them via email over to me on my PC, and we looked at them, I said, "Okay, great, good to go." She goes, "Oh my God, these are terrible." I go, "No, what are you talking about? These are great. This is exactly what I asked for." Well, look at how the line around the F has this little wavy. I'm like, what? What exactly are you saying? But instantly, when she looked at it, she saw these details that are specific to a graphic designer.
Yeah.
I saw content that's specific to a speaker. So yeah, I'm not going to be as good as she is, nor is she going to get up on stage and do the keynote for me. But that's why, like you say, you've got to trust people and realize that there's a lot of things that you may think you're good at. I mean, a guy that I had coached years ago had a small company and was always stuck in his business at about $6 million a year. That was his number in revenue, $6 million. Could not grow the business beyond that. And when you dug in, it was because, he had his finger on every button
Yep.
and
There,
he couldn't let go.
our industry is, especially in independent agency space, those plateaus are very real and they're different, but you could look at studies done by leading industry agency consultancies, the Reagans, the Marshberries, Agency Focus, some of these
Right.
others, and they all might draw the line differently, but there are very noticeable plateaus that keep
Mhm.
an agency from growing. And usually, Frank, they're around those kind of things. At some point, you get to a certain size where, in order to scale, the person or a couple of people who are in control
Mhm.
need to slice a piece of their day off,
Yeah.
delegate, allocate, create new roles, maybe even create a small set of equity for somebody else who now is fully,
Sure.
and to start to slice those things out. And oftentimes that's an investment in a role that doesn't necessarily translate in a traditional sense
Yeah.
to sales, operations person, a marketing person,
Yeah.
a CTO kind of role. But that being willing to recognize that your time is better suited in areas
Mhm.
aligned with your title and the role you serve in an organization is a hard thing. And I can say this as somebody who's talked to hundreds, if not thousands, of agencies about this,
Yeah.
but completely acknowledging I've never bought one meal for my family from an insurance commission check. So I realize that I've not ever done this before. I've just had the benefit of seeing really successful
Yeah.
shops come through these things and agencies struggling with it and trying to connect them with people who can help. And there's oftentimes when struggling to grow, it's not letting go
Mhm.
of things and letting salespeople go be salespeople and
Yeah. Yeah.
service staff be service staff
Yeah.
and operational expertise be operational
Mhm.
expertise. It's hard. And when you've built the thing from scratch, if you've bootstrapped
Oh,
it or you've
sure.
acquired it from a family member and you want to take it to the next level, we all have a sense of accountability and ownership over these things
Yeah.
and a great deal of pride.
Yeah.
And it's hard, but it's essential.
But it's the only way you'll scale. Thinking about you saying you've seen in so many different agencies and talked to thousands. And so, what do you think are the common traits of the most successful salespeople that that you've encountered? Are there things about them that jump out at you that you say they all have this or they seem to have that? What would you say are the top couple of things that jump out?
I keep coming back to a little bit around really knowing who you want to go after, because then I think your passion and your commitment to understanding the problems that your customers are dealing with and really understanding how what you're selling can address those. I think it's hard to do that if you're trying to serve every customer.
Right. Right.
Just yes, everybody needs insurance, but each type of business segment needs something a little different and has nuances to their risk. So getting clear around that, leveraging your tools and resources. I mean, if you're working an organization that's got people that sort of take each step of the funnel and own that, let them. You know, they're pros at it. They care about it,
Yeah.
and it's keeping you from doing the things that you add value. And I say continue to learn. I mean, this is very complex industry. The industries you serve are very complex, and complacency and believing that we know everything. I mean, this is cliche, but one of the things that you can see where producers start to become stagnant is that they've kind of gotten to the point where they don't really need to earn anymore, or you've kind of done enough, and there's this loss of energy or desire to continue to learn and grow. And there's another nuance in our industry that insurance people listening will know is the blessing and curse of renewable income.
Yeah.
And so it's why so many external investors want to own agencies. I
Hmm.
mean, gosh, first of all, everybody has to buy it.
No
Second of all,
kidding.
even at bad agencies, 75 or 80% of your revenue is comes back every year. And good
Hmm.
ones, it can be 85, 90 plus.
Yeah.
Well, at a producer who is getting paid on renewal commissions, you eventually get to the point where I don't have to sell much every year to make a very, very nice living. And so
If your
thinking
retention
about,
rate is good, sure. And I mean, part of that, the good and the bad of that is the retention of the employee, right? Because he's not going to leave you if he's got all these accounts that are paying them that kind of money. So the retention part is really nice, but you give up maybe the growth at the top end a little bit.
yeah,
And that's, I mean, I think it's the job of the leadership to figure out how to keep that person interested or understand how to carve off some of the more dormant accounts and bring in
yeah.
somebody newer and let that person start to grow the business, in a different way.
Yeah, there's a couple of things there that get more like into agency management space, but there's some leading thought around actually reducing producers' compensation on renewals
Yeah.
and redirecting that towards new business and then taking the
Yeah.
delta and investing in a support staff. Day one, that's more expensive to the agency, but
Hmm.
agencies that think that way actually have better organic growth and higher sales velocity numbers than those who don't.
And Chris, I've
And
seen that. Chris, I've seen that in so many other businesses
oh,
where
fantastic.
salespeople get, renewals are paid this percent of commission and net new is paid this percent. The cost basis, when it's a hardware business, the cost basis on a net new is lower. The service contract for a net new client is lower because to acquire those folks, think about it. If you have a rental company, right? I used to coach a rental company. They rented motion picture cameras to movie and television business. So what's, there's nothing but right rental income keeps coming, but what's the cost to maintain the gear? When do you buy new stuff? How do you manage that? And when you're going after a net new customer, how much lower because you're up against competition, right? Should that initial rental rate be? But what will that mean to you long term if you have that customer? Because that one machine that you spend $10 on and you rent for $1 a day, after 10 days, you're making money. So acquiring that customer and getting them to rent from you again and again and again, it's worth that upfront. So yeah, I've seen that in so many businesses where they pay less for a renewal to this professional salesperson. And, some of the salespeople maybe will complain about that. I've been doing this a long time. Why do I have to
Yeah.
go and find net new? And my answer to them is, what you can be great at. If let's say you've been doing it a long time and maybe out knocking on doors, again in air quotes, right, for net new is not too appealing when you've got a big book of business in any industry. But man, can you do well on referrals? Holy cow, if you focus your energy on talking to your clients on a regular basis, I want to ask you about that, where the technology can help me with that. But being in constant touch with my clients so that they know who I am, they know what I'm doing, they love me. Now, aren't I in a position to get them to recommend the net new, and I don't have to go out and knock doors? So, how does the technology, Chris, help me to stay in touch with my client base if I'm using it properly?
That's probably one of the more developed ways that I think insurance producers and agencies are leveraging um, automation at large today. And as I lead into that, because I think it's important, one of the things you were alluding to is in that case where the principal or the leadership is redirecting expectations and dividing the overall revenue from a new client up in different ways, to me speaks to how critical it is to understand the data of your business and the economics of a dollar of income and how it gets sliced and diced,
Yeah.
and then the expense associated with core transactions in an organization. And then you have this cultural component of how transparent is the organization with their
Sure.
staff so they understand why they're being asked to do what they're doing, and more importantly, why they're being asked to do something differently, and how that helps the organization succeed and let the organization invest back into their experience and client experience. But in today's world, particularly in insurance, there's some really great tools out there, commercially available, CRM or automated management or marketing type platforms. We talk about AI. We haven't really talked much about AI, but in a world like that, the ability now for a producer or an organization to maintain frequent, relevant, very personalized communications
Yeah.
has never been better. And so understanding each client, where they're at in their policy life cycle, what's going on through their
Right.
own journey, and being able to leverage automated communications, we see that emerging as a best practice
Hmm.
to starting to create personas for client type, investing
Absolutely.
in some technology to personalize the communications around key events. And then there's an upfront investment in writing, I'm using air quotes, but
Sure.
writing content, emails, letters, social media, whatever, those kind of things, and then letting the automation get it to the people on
Well,
a
how about let the
predetermined.
automation write it?
That's it. Well, that's part of it too, right? And
Right?
then you
Why
can kind of
not?
go
I
back and
mean, give me an email for, give me a message, an email for a client that is this level of the game that I've only had for 1 year that I want to touch,
yeah,
3 times a year. And give me another one for a client that's at this level that I want to touch monthly or whatever. And, and then you can go ahead and edit those. Don't just take
yeah,
lock, stock, and barrel, but the bulk of the work gets done for you. And now you can reach out because, what you don't want to be as a salesperson in any business is the salesperson that shows up at the time of renewal. When you're that salesperson that, you have a 5-year agreement with somebody and, you're the real estate person and you've rented the space for 5 years or whatever business you're in, and then you show up 3 months before the end and say, want to talk about renewal, but I haven't heard from you. You're the car person that leased me the car for 3 years, and 3 months before the end of the lease, you're calling me about renewal. Well, did you call me at 12 months and say, how do you like it? I mean, it's an
that's
easy
it.
thing to do, right? You can, and with the automation, as you're suggesting, Chris, you can do this hands off. I would only suggest put in the cadence a call in certain spots. A stop by if it's appropriate for your industry. I know people that sell insurance to farms. They want to do a stop by. It's essential. But beyond that, I think whether it's a phone call, a Zoom call, a stop by, whatever, in your cadence of emails that may have been written by ChatGPT and maybe a cadence that's automated in your CRM, put somewhere in there to make sure that you infuse you personally, your voice, your face, somehow during the years of that contract.
Yeah, I was going to say that'd be kind of like a great way to sum that up is leveraging all of the technology today to do some of the frequency and the different key contact points along the way. That seems to be almost a non-negotiable in the world. And I think for producers that are out there in an industry that are, sort of maybe my age and older, like that's hard to like, I
Yeah.
don't want to let that go to an automation. What if it doesn't say what if I want? But
Right.
the other part then is to not go too far the other way, which I think is what you're saying, and rely only on technology,
Right.
because that then starts to allow us to almost concede to these notions that technology
Exactly.
is going to
Point and
displace
click,
us.
baby.
And so
There you
understanding,
go.
and there's no perfect formula for this, right? Each customer segment, but if we talk about this overarching thread of being more proactive and intentional, of letting automation do repeatable, routine tasks that don't really need a human being to add value in them, let them, but then actually do the things where human can add value, which is exactly what you're talking about. Let 7 contacts a year happen via your automated communication process and those kind of things. Do something with feedback if it happens, but then you can add real value by being there as a human being, however that looks at the right time. Because it's cliched to say, but every one of your customers is a prospect to every one of your competitors. So if you're not talking to them as their X date is coming up, rest assured other insurance agencies or other
Absolutely.
competitors in your space are out there talking to them.
Chris, that whole thing was super well said. I mean, the way you summed up the technology and the human element was perfect. I have a question for you from my last guest, and
Okay.
it's in
Uh-oh.
my chicken scratch, so bear with me as I try to decipher what I wrote off on the side while he was talking. But what he wants to know is, especially from carrier to agency, because he was in the insurance business as well, is the tech workload overbearing to any part of folks that are working, especially from the carrier to the agency? Is there too much data input required to get the results that we want the technology to give us?
No, that's a loaded question.
Yeah, right?
Considering my lifelong stint on the carrier side, I always will say I will have carrier DNA, and maybe even in some worlds get accused of being a carrier apologist. Uh, I think we are in a time where I would love to say short term, the answer is probably yes.
Okay.
And I will kind of sort of wrap that up in saying I think that the intentions, by and large, of carriers as an institution is largely with good intent. So
Hmm.
agencies would love to be able to, once they've entered something in their management system, for example, to kind of control that experientially for their clients. That's one of
Right.
the unique things about
Sure.
our industry is the agent owns that relationship. And carriers have spent the last 10, 15 years, maybe even longer, trying to build the tools to do that.
Right.
The roads have not intersected well.
Okay.
And so you got the 39,000 plus agencies, a couple thousand carriers, all these different technology tools. So the
Right.
math is mathing in a very complex way. But I think, particularly with the capabilities of AI to connect browser to browser based
Mm.
data, we may get to a point where this belief or this goal of a true single entry becomes more real sooner.
Okay.
And I don't know whether that's 24 months or 10
That's
years.
okay. It's a
But I
good
think
place to go with.
agencies
Yeah.
still today, part of their frustration is even despite the overall health and financial health of an independent agency, again, as an institution,
Hmm.
is very, very strong. It's a real thing that many independent agencies, if somebody wanted to quote you and I with 4 carriers,
Yeah.
they would likely still have to go into 3 or 4 of those carriers' platforms
Sure.
and do something to customize our rate.
Right.
And I, the goal would be, hey, I've already entered it. Let me just send it out to my carriers. Let me get a price back, or let me do the servicing and do that. And so I don't think the carriers are trying to intentionally put more work on an agent's desk
Hmm.
as a strategic goal.
Right.
But we're in this journey, and in the moment, it's not perfect.
Right.
I don't know. Maybe I.
No, well said, well said. I think uh, coming up as we're wrapping up our time together, I wanted to ask you for just the overarching theme. Do you see salespeople in your business being replaced by AI? And if not, why won't they be? I know we covered some of that in the beginning, but what's your final statement on that?
I, I think in the short term, no. I think that more and more consumers and businesses will embrace AI. On the business side, it'll be for operational efficiency and
Hmm.
some experience management. Consumers will be using AI, I think, in a different level, largely to become educated
Yeah.
and evaluate risk and do kinds of things. I don't know that I'm in the camp. I'm not in the camp that in the next several years, market share will radically be impacted
Okay.
by artificial intelligence or impact the ability of a producer to go add value over time. I think if our industry at large and producers as a segment of that don't stay diligent in evolving their role, embracing the technology in ways they can, and continuing to find ways to add unique value as a human being, it could erode the role of a salesperson.
Boy, that's the
Um,
whole thing wrapped up in a beautiful package. You said that perfectly. I cannot wait to watch this back. That was very, very well said. You encapsulated the whole feeling right there in that last statement. So, Chris, if people want to buy your book or they want to hire you to speak at an event, what do they do? Where do they go? How do they find you? What do you want to tell them?
Gosh, yeah. I mean, I love connecting with people and learning. These connections and the network that we have in our industry I view them as much about ways to expand my network and meet people and experiences. But I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. You can find me there. The book's on Amazon, The Inertia of Legacy. And if you're interested, if you're insurance industry folks and want to learn more about the Big I or what we're doing specifically at ACT, reach out to your individual state association or contact me directly. I mean, there's the cool thing about every Big I at the state and national level is that um, full of employees who care immensely about the health and viability of independent agencies and have dedicated the portion of their career to helping. So we'd love to talk to you about that. But LinkedIn's great. I'm also bouncing around on X
Okay.
and Instagram, and definitely appreciate the chance to chat, Frank, and talk about things I don't really talk about every day. It's awesome.
And we'll put all that stuff in the show notes so people can just click on and find you and find your book and so on and so forth. So, Chris Klein, you're awesome. I love the way that we were able to go back and forth in these two different levels of humanity versus machine and how they blend together. And I think you explained it super well. So I'm very appreciative of the time you were able to give me. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ready to take your sales team or event to the next level? Visit franksomma.com to discover how Frank can coach your top performers, deliver a tailored workshop for your team, or captivate your audience with a content-packed keynote at your next event. Frank's best-selling book, B2B is really P2P, is now available on Amazon and Frank's website. Here's a special offer. As a valued listener, mention this podcast when you contact Frank and receive a 10% discount on your first coaching session, keynote, or workshop booking.
That's a wrap. Thanks so much for tuning into this episode of Selling in the Age of AI. Be sure to check out the show notes for links to all of the topics we discussed, and of course, to connect with our amazing guests. I have to shout out big love to my production team, Neeks, Angelo, Nico of Digital Presence. You guys rock. If you want your digital presence to explode, check these guys out at digitalpresence.team. And until next time, remember, people can't point and click you. Be the difference maker for your prospects and clients.